The year was 3224. For centuries, the Galactic Empire had ruled over the known stars with an iron grip, expanding its reach from the core worlds to the farthest, darkest edges of the galaxy. It wasn't just planets or civilizations that were under the Empire's control. It was the very will of the people. Resistance was crushed swiftly, and fear was a weapon sharper than any blade or laser. Yet beneath this oppressive regime, in the cold, metallic depths of a mining colony on the edge of space, something stirred. A silent spark waiting to ignite. Silver Vein was one of many mining operations, tucked away on a moon orbiting the gas giant Velder. To outsiders, it was just another colony focused on extracting valuable metals to fuel the Empire's war machines. To those who lived and worked there, it was a cage. The workers were kept under constant surveillance, with little contact from the outside world. They weren't slaves, but they might as well have been. The mines ran 24 hours a day, with shifts that seemed endless. The miners, a mix of humans and various alien species, had long since given up hope of escape. The Empire was everywhere, and even the thought of rebellion was too dangerous to entertain. But beneath the surface, hidden away in the dark tunnels, an old legend was whispered. A legend about a secret hidden deep within Silver Vein, something that could turn the tide against the Empire. It was said that within the core of the moon lay a powerful artifact, something that, if found, could give whoever held it unimaginable power. Some called it the Key of the Silent Resistance. Others simply referred to it as the Key. Of course, most believed it to be just that, a legend, another myth, to keep hope alive in the otherwise hopeless. But there were a few who believed, a few who had seen things, heard things, that convinced them the legend was real. And among them was Doran. Doran Ryan was a miner, just like the others, but he was different in one important way. He was willing to risk everything. Doran had grown up on the moon, his family having worked in the mines for generations. He knew the tunnels like the back of his hand, and he had heard the stories about the key since he was a boy. But unlike most, he hadn't let go of the dream of finding it. Over the years, he had quietly gathered information, piecing together bits of the puzzle. He had discovered old maps, hidden data logs, even messages from long-dead miners that pointed to something deeper within the moon, something ancient and powerful. One night, after his shift, Doran sat alone in his small, cramped living quarters. The room was dimly lit, and the cold, metallic walls made it feel more like a cell than a home. He stared at a worn datapad, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. On it was the latest piece of the puzzle, a message from a miner who had died nearly 20 years ago. The message was simple, but had reignited the fire in Doran's heart. It's real. The key is real. It's deeper than we've ever gone. They're hiding it from us. Doran couldn't shake the feeling that the time had come. For years, he had waited, bided his time, knowing that if he moved too soon, the Empire would crush him. But now he was ready. He had gathered enough information. He had found a few trusted allies, people who, like him, believed in the legend. And most importantly, he had found a way to reach the deepest parts of the mine, areas that had long been sealed off by the Empire. The next step was risky. Doran needed to gather his small group and plan the descent. He knew the Empire's patrols were increasing, especially with the rumors of unrest in other sectors. The workers were becoming restless, the Empire more paranoid. The timing was delicate, but Doran was nothing if not patient. As he prepared to leave his quarters and meet with his closest ally, Lyra, a loud knock echoed through the room. Doran froze. No one ever came to his quarters unannounced, especially at this hour. He quickly turned off the datapad, hiding it under a pile of clothes on his bed. Another knock, this time more urgent. Doran hesitated, then moved to the door, opening it just a crack. Standing outside was a tall, gaunt man in the uniform of the Empire's security force. His face was hidden behind a helmet, but Doran could feel the man's cold eyes on him. Doran Ryan. The officer's voice was mechanical, filtered through his helmet. Doran's heart pounded in his chest. "Yeah, that's me. What do you want?" The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "We need to talk." Doran felt a chill run down his spine. He opened the door a little wider, but didn't invite the man in. "About what?" The officer glanced around, checking the hallway. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "The key." For a moment, Doran couldn't breathe. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but his mind raced. How did this officer know about the key? Was this some kind of trap? Or was it possible that he, too, was a believer? "I don't know what you're talking about," Doran replied, keeping his voice steady. The officer stepped even closer, now only inches from Doran. "Yes, you do. And we don't have much time. Meet me in Tunnel 6 tomorrow night, just before the second shift starts. And don't tell anyone." Before Doran could respond, the officer turned on his heel and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Doran standing in the doorway, his heart still pounding. He closed the door, leaning against it, as he tried to calm himself. Tunnel 6. Tomorrow night. Was this the break he had been waiting for? Or was it a trap set by the Empire to finally silence him? Either way, Doran knew one thing. He had no choice but to find out. The next day passed in a blur for Doran. Every sound, every movement around him felt heightened. He couldn't stop thinking about the officer, his cryptic message, and the upcoming meeting in Tunnel 6. The shift in the mine was grueling as always, but Doran barely felt the weight of the tools in his hands. His mind was too occupied, and he found himself lost in thought, constantly replaying the officer's words in his head. Tunnel 6 was one of the older sections of the mine, long abandoned after several cave-ins made it too dangerous for regular operations. It was also the area where the legends of the key were the strongest. Some said it was the first place the Empire discovered something so important that they quickly sealed it off, claiming it was unstable. But Doran knew better. He had seen the maps, talked to the old miners who remembered when the tunnel was still operational. There was something down there, and if this officer was telling the truth, Doran was about to find out what it was. As the second shift neared, Doran made his way to the meeting point, keeping his movements casual. He didn't want to draw attention. The mine's security was always tight, with surveillance drones constantly patrolling the tunnels. But Doran had spent enough time in the mines to know the blind spots, the places where the drones rarely ventured. He arrived at Tunnel 6 just as the shift began. The area was deserted. As expected, the tunnel entrance was blocked by a thick metal gate, marked with warning signs about the danger of collapse. Doran had been here many times before, studying the gate, looking for ways in, but he had never been brave enough to go further. Until now. Just as he was about to approach the gate, he heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, hand instinctively reaching for the small blade he kept hidden in his boot. But it wasn't an officer or a security drone. It was Lyra. "You're jumpy," she said with a grin, her green eyes glinting in the dim light of the tunnel. Doran relaxed, but only slightly. Lyra was his most trusted ally, and one of the few people he had confided in about the key. She was a skilled mechanic, having spent most of her life fixing the mining equipment, and she was as determined as Doran to find out the truth. If anyone could help him, it was her. "What are you doing here?" Doran asked, glancing over his shoulder. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, folding her arms. "You've been acting weird all day. Thought I'd see what you were up to." Doran let out a breath, his shoulders tense. He hoped to do this quietly, but Lyra had always been sharp, noticing things others missed. He couldn't blame her for following him. After all, she had a right to know. But still, if this was a trap, she could be in as much danger as him. "I got a message," Doran said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one else was nearby. "From a security officer. He knows about the key." Lyra's eyes widened, her playful grin fading. "A security officer? How do you know this isn't some kind of setup?" "The Empire doesn't exactly trust us miners, Doran. You've said it yourself. If they even suspect we're looking for something, they'll have us thrown into a black cell before we can blink." "I know," Doran replied, the weight of her words settling on him. "But we can't just ignore this. He told me to meet him here. If there's even a chance he's telling the truth, We have to find out. Lyra frowned, clearly torn between her loyalty to Doran and her instincts to keep them both safe. All right, but if this goes south, we're getting out of here. I'm not about to let you drag me into an Imperial trap. Doran gave her a quick nod. Deal. Just as they began to move toward the gate, the sound of boots echoed down the tunnel. The officer from the previous night appeared, his tall, gaunt figure casting a shadow on the cold, metallic walls. He was alone, his helmet still obscuring his face, but his posture was tense, almost nervous. It was clear he wasn't used to operating outside the rigid structure of Imperial command. "You came," the officer said quietly, stopping a few feet away from Doran and Lyra. Doran narrowed his eyes, his voice low and controlled. "I did. Now tell me, what's this all about? How do you know about the key?" The officer glanced around before speaking, as if he expected the walls themselves to be listening. "I don't have much time, so I'll be quick. My name is Kelrin. I used to be part of the excavation team before I was reassigned to security. I know what the Empire is hiding down here, and I know you've been looking for it. The key. It's real, and it's more powerful than you can imagine." Lyra crossed her arms, clearly skeptical. "And what's your angle in all this? Why are you telling us this now?" Kelrin hesitated, then reached up and removed his helmet, revealing a weary, pale face. His eyes, dark and tired, met Doran's with a kind of desperation. Because the Empire is coming for it. They're planning something big, something that'll change the balance of power across the galaxy. I don't know all the details, but I've seen enough to know it's dangerous. If they get their hands on the key, it'll be the end of any hope of resistance. But if we get to it first, you want us to trust you?" Lyra interrupted, her voice sharp. "After everything the Empire's done, after they've killed anyone who even looked like they were resisting, why should we believe you're any different?" Kelrin took a deep breath, his expression hardening. "Because I'm not one of them anymore. I've seen what they're capable of, and I've seen what they plan to do. I can't just stand by and watch. I've risked everything just by coming here. If they find out I'm helping you, I'm dead. But if we work together, we can stop them. We can find the key and use it against them." Doran studied Kelrin's face, searching for any sign of deception. He didn't fully trust the officer, but there was something in his eyes, something raw and genuine. The kind of desperation that came from realizing too late the monster you've been serving. "If you're lying to us," Doran began, but Kelrin cut him off. "I'm not. Look, I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I know where the entrance is. The Empire sealed it off years ago, but I can get us in. We don't have much time. They're planning to send a team down here within the next few days to retrieve it. If we're going to act, we have to do it now." Doran exchanged a look with Lyra. She still looked skeptical, but there was a flicker of something else, curiosity, maybe even hope. They had spent years searching for this moment, and now it was here, right in front of them. If Kelrin was telling the truth, this could be their only chance. "What's your plan?" Doran asked, his voice steady. Kelrin glanced toward the sealed gate at the entrance to Tunnel 6. "We need to get past that gate. The old tunnels lead deeper into the moon, to places no one has been in decades. The key is down there, in a chamber the Empire found but never fully explored. They sealed off when they realized what they were dealing with. But I have the access codes." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "And you're just going to waltz in with us? No backup, no surveillance?" Kelrin shook his head. "No. We do this quietly, or not at all. If anyone else finds out what we're doing, we're as good as dead." Doran considered the risks. This could easily be a trap, but something about Kelrin's demeanor told him otherwise. The man was clearly scared of what the Empire would do if they found out, but also scared of what the key could do in the wrong hands. "All right," Doran finally said. "We'll go with you. But if anything feels off, we're pulling the plug." "Got it." Kelrin nodded. "Understood. Follow me." The three of them moved toward the gate, Kelrin reaching into a small pouch at his waist and pulling out a small, handheld device. He pressed a series of buttons, and the device emitted a faint hum. A few moments later, the gate shuttered, then slowly began to rise, revealing the dark, gaping maw of Tunnel 6. Doran and Lyra exchanged a quick glance before stepping forward, following Kelrin into the tunnel. The air was colder here, the walls damp and covered in a thin layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. It felt like they were stepping into another world, a world that had been forgotten by time. Kelrin led them deeper into the tunnel, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As they walked, the tunnel began to slope downward, the walls narrowing until they were forced to walk single file. The further they went, the darker it became, until the only light came from the faint glow of their flashlights. "How far does this go?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kelrin didn't look back. Far enough. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the air growing colder with each step. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the moon. Doran could feel the weight of the rock above them, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. But he didn't let it slow him down. He kept his focus on the path ahead, on the promise of the key. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into a large cavern. The ceiling was high, disappearing into the shadows above, and the walls were lined with strange, glowing crystals that pulsed faintly in the darkness. At the center of the cavern stood a massive, ancient door covered in intricate carvings and symbols that Doran didn't recognize. "This is it," Kelrin said quietly, his voice reverent. The entrance to the chamber. Doran stared at the door, his heart pounding. They had come so far, risked so much, and now they were here, standing on the edge of something that could change everything. Lyra stepped forward, running her fingers along the carvings on the door. "How do we open it?" Kelrin hesitated, then pulled out the small device he had used to open the gate. "There's a mechanism in the door, hidden beneath the carvings. I can activate it, but once we're inside, there's no turning back. The chamber is protected by a series of traps. I don't know what they are, but I know the Empire was never able to get past them." Doran felt a chill run down his spine. "And you think we can?" Kelrin's expression was grim. "I think we have no choice." They were standing at the precipice of an ancient mystery, one that could either save them or destroy them. And as the door slowly began to creak open, revealing the darkness beyond, Doran knew that whatever lay ahead, there was no going back. The cold air from the chamber beyond the door seemed to carry with it the weight of millennia. Doran, Lyra, and Kelrin stood in silence for a moment, staring into the pitch-black void before them. The faint glow of the crystals in the cavern walls did little to illuminate the space beyond the threshold. Whatever lay ahead was shrouded in darkness, as if the chamber itself was reluctant to reveal its secrets. Kelrin was the first to step forward, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the dark. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice tense. The traps, they could be anywhere. Doran followed, his grip tightening on the small blade he carried. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He couldn't help but glance at Lyra, who was eyeing the walls, her expression a mix of determination and anxiety. She was smart, capable, and she had been through worse. But this was uncharted territory. As they stepped deeper into the chamber, the walls began to take shape, revealing more of the strange carvings that adorned the entrance. These carvings, however, were far more intricate, telling stories of ancient battles, strange beings, and the rise and fall of what looked like empires long forgotten. The figures depicted were not just human. There were alien species Doran had never seen before, their forms twisted and exaggerated, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. "This place feels wrong," Lyra muttered, her voice barely audible. Doran nodded, his throat dry. "Like it's watching us." Kelrin stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Look, ahead of them, the floor of the chamber dropped off into a wide, circular pit. The pit was massive, its edges disappearing into the darkness. In the center, hovering just above the floor, was a large, stone pedestal. On top of the pedestal sat a small, glowing object, no larger than a fist, emitting a soft, silver light. Doran's heart skipped a beat. "The key." Kelrin nodded, but his face was grim. "It looks too easy, doesn't it?" Lyra took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. There's no way the Empire didn't try to get past this. What stopped them? As if in answer to her question, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. A deep, grinding sound echoed through the chamber, followed by the unmistakable click of ancient mechanisms coming to life. "Get back," Kelrin shouted, pulling Doran and Lyra away from the edge of the pit. The floor around the pedestal began to shift, revealing rows of sharp, metallic spikes that shot up from hidden compartments in the ground. The spikes formed a deadly barrier around the pedestal, their tips glinting in the dim light. "Traps," Kelrin muttered, his voice tight. The Empire couldn't get past them. Lyra cursed under her breath. "So what do we do now? There's no way we're getting across with those spikes in the way." Doran stared at the pedestal, his mind racing. There had to be a way. The key was right there, so close he could almost feel its power. But how could they reach it without triggering more traps? Kelrin pulled out the handheld device again, his fingers flying over the controls. "I've seen schematics of the chamber. There's a control mechanism hidden somewhere in these walls. If I can find it, I might be able to deactivate the traps." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Might." Kelrin shot her a look. "Do you have a better idea?" Doran stepped forward, scanning the walls. The carvings seemed to pulse with energy, their ancient stories coming to life under the silver glow of the key. His eyes landed on a section of the wall near the far side of the chamber. The carvings there were different, more geometric, more deliberate. "There," he said, pointing. "That's got to be it." Kelrin nodded and moved toward the wall, but as he reached it, the ground beneath his feet gave a low groan, as if warning him to stay back. He froze, his eyes wide. "Careful," Doran called out. "The traps might be everywhere." Kelrin took a deep breath, then slowly began to inspect the wall. His fingers traced the lines of the carvings, feeling for anything out of place. After a few tense moments, his hand stopped on a small, barely noticeable indentation. "I think I found it," Kelrin said, his voice barely above a whisper. He pressed his hand against the indentation, and with a soft click, the wall shifted. A small panel slid open, revealing a series of ancient controls, glowing faintly in the darkness. Kelrin stared at the controls, his brow furrowed. "These are old, really old. I'm not sure I can even..." Before he could finish, the ground beneath him shook violently. The entire chamber seemed to tremble as ancient machinery groaned to life. The spikes around the pedestal retracted, but in their place, a deep, resonant hum filled the air. Lyra's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" Kelrin's face went pale. "Something's wrong. I think I triggered another." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the chamber, followed by a blinding flash of light. From the walls, beams of energy shot out, crisscrossing the chamber in a deadly lattice. The beams moved with terrifying precision, cutting through the air with a high-pitched whine. "Move," Doran shouted, pushing Lyra out of the way just as a beam sliced through the spot where she had been standing. Kelrin dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding another beam as it shot past his head. "We need to get out of here, now." The beams were moving faster, closing in on the trio with every passing second. Doran's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them. Not for long. There had to be another way. He glanced at the pedestal, still hovering in the center of the pit. The key was there, untouched, its silver light glowing brighter with every pulse of energy in the room. It was almost as if the key itself was feeding off the chaos. "We have to get to the key," Doran shouted over the deafening hum. "It's the only way to stop this." Lyra stared at him like he was crazy. "And how are we supposed to do that without getting fried by one of these things?" But Doran was already moving. He dodged another beam, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no time to think, no time to plan. He just had to trust his instincts. As he approached the edge of the pit, the beams seemed to slow, their paths becoming more erratic, almost as if they were reacting to his presence. Doran hesitated for only a moment before leaping toward the pedestal. For a split second, he was weightless, suspended in the air above the deadly chasm. Then, with a hard thud, he landed on the stone platform inches away from the key. The beams continued to fire around him, but none of them touched the pedestal. It was as if the key was protecting him, creating a small bubble of safety in the chaos. Doran reached out, his hand trembling as he wrapped his fingers around the key. It was warm to the touch, pulsing with a steady, rhythmic beat. For a moment, everything else faded away. The beams, the noise, the fear. All that mattered was the key and the power it held. As soon as Doran lifted the key from the pedestal, the entire chamber went silent. The beams of energy vanished, the humming stopped, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid once again. He stood there, breathing heavily, clutching the key in his hand. The silver light bathed him in a soft glow, and for the first time, he felt the true weight of what he had just done. Lyra and Kelrin slowly approached, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. You did it," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "You actually did it." Doran stared at the key, feeling its warmth seep into his skin. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think we just changed everything." Doran stood with the key in his hand, its silver glow casting long, eerie shadows on the walls of the ancient chamber. The once deafening hum of the machinery had faded into a deep silence, leaving only the sound of their breathing echoing in the space. Lyra and Kelrin were at his side, both staring at the key with a mix of awe and apprehension. It was real. After all the years of searching, all the whispers and rumors, the key was real. Doran could feel the key pulsing in his hand, a constant reminder of the burden he now carried. The fate of the Resistance, maybe even the galaxy, rested in his hands. And yet, as he moved through the city, blending in with the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The key was powerful, yes, but it was also dangerous. The stories of what it could do were just that, stories. No one truly knew its full potential, not even the Empire. As he approached the east side of the city, Doran spotted the symbol Kelrin had mentioned, a faded mark on the side of a rundown building, barely visible through the grime and rust. It was an old Resistance emblem, from a time before the Empire had fully cemented its rule. Doran slipped inside the building, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was dark and quiet, the air thick with dust, and the smell of old machinery. Lyra was already there, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She looked up as Doran entered, her expression serious. "Where's Kelrin?" she asked, her voice low. Doran shook his head. "Not here yet. He'll be along." Lyra frowned, glancing at the key in Doran's hand. "You sure about this? About him?" Doran hesitated, the weight of her question sinking in. "I don't know, but we don't have a choice. If we're going to stand any chance against the Empire, we need to understand what this thing is, what it can do." Lyra nodded, though the doubt was clear in her eyes. "Let's hope we're making the right call." They waited in silence, the tension thick in the air. The key pulsed faintly in Doran's hand, its glow casting long shadows on the walls of the dimly lit room. Minutes stretched into hours, and still, there was no sign of Kelrin. Doran's unease grew with each passing moment. Something wasn't right. And then, just as he was about to suggest they leave, the door creaked open. Doran's heart leapt into his throat, but it wasn't Kelrin who entered. It was an Imperial officer, flanked by two heavily armed troopers. Well, the officer said, his voice cold and mocking. "Looks like we found our little thieves." Doran's blood ran cold. Kelrin had betrayed them.